Hello and welcome back to Everard Junction. Today I'm going to be working on various little projects and things that have been building up on the to-do list all around the layout. So we'll be jumping around a little bit, but I thought you'd be interested to see the various little bits and pieces that I do to improve or add to various areas that I built a while ago. The urban area that I started working on in the previous update video is still very much under construction, and those terraced houses are certainly taking a bit longer than I anticipated. So there will be a video to follow on the terraced houses, and of course the buildings that are going to go in various other sections on this part of the layout. So we'll leave that for the time being, and instead I'm going to work on a few other projects, just have a little bit of a break from working on those buildings. So over the last couple of years, a lot of the scenery has been focused on the foreground in front of the tracks, but the reality is there is a reasonable bit of space behind the track, and in certain areas of the layout it's actually quite large. So this is going to be the first area that we're going to work on, and I've already made some preparations. So I've set some of the insulating foam, the Celotex type foam, down onto the frames of the baseboard, and then I've just gone over that with a little bit of plywood. I think there's about 9mm thick plywood, just give me a little bit more of a solid foundation to work with, and that brings the level of the terrain here up to a similar sort of level as it would be on this side. So what I can do now is I can add some retaining walls to this section of the layout, and then we'll get some much needed detail that goes behind the track. I mean, it just looks like the trains are running on a grassy embankment, or they're just running on the edge of a cliff. So a little bit of brickwork detail and retaining wall along here will certainly look nice. So we've got a nice foundation for that to sit on, and then you can see at the edge of the layout here, the edge of the track bed, I've added some 25mm insulating foam, just glued that into position, and that will space the retaining wall off just right, so that we've got a bit of room for the infrastructure detail, any signals, and there's room for workers to traverse and walk up and down the track without being at risk of being squashed by a train. So here we have the walls, just finished putting these together. Do take a little while to put together, but it is a nice little kit. These are made by Wills, which is part of the Pico range, and as I've used these in other sections close by, it makes sense for the other side of the track to be constructed using the same sort of retaining walls. So after assembling these, I've primed them in grey primer just from an aerosol can, and then I like to paint my retaining walls in Humbrol 70. I do have lots of different colours that I use for brick. I try not to fall into the trap of all of the brickwork on the layout being exactly the same colour, but for the walls I think the sort of dark Humbrol 70 does do quite a nice job. So I've painted these on both sides, and although you could argue don't need to paint this side, just in case you can see or peer over the edge, I've painted these just to be sure. I'll add the drain pipes later, they just need to be painted black, and we'll add some mortar washing to the wall on this side. I'm not going to bother mortar washing on this side, I don't think it's particularly necessary. I'll see how it looks once I've loosely placed it into position, but it's going to be really hard to look at this side of the wall, so it's not the garish self-coloured plastic anymore. I think we'll be okay just leaving it as is. Okay, so I've just applied the mortar wash. It's just a mix of various acrylic paints, mostly white and a sort of beige, just to get the colour I'm after. Depending on the brickwork you're doing will dictate the colour of the mortar wash, but I've gone for this sort of light beige colour, and once you rub off the excess, it really brings the building or the brickwork to life. It's one of the best things you can do to some embossed brickwork. So there you can see the completed wash. A bit time consuming, but certainly worth the effort. So I'll go ahead and finish the rest of this wall, and then we'll do a little bit of weathering and put it onto the layout. I'm also just painting the capping stones. I'm using a Humbrol colour for that. It's number 87, and it's just got this sort of nice concrete colour with a little bit of green to it. I quite like it, so I've been using it on the tops of the walls. Okay, well, I finished removing the excess mortar wash. We've just done a small amount of weathering with some black soot weathering powder. I'm using the Tamiya Weathering Master sets. I quite like using those. They don't make as much mess as traditional powders. And then just take it gently. You have to be careful because a little bit goes a very long way. It can be a little bit hard to remove. Okay, so I've just glued the wall into position. You can see its various weights just positioned behind, just to keep it pushed into the side of the track. I'm pleased with that, so that should dry in a couple of minutes, and then we'll carry on and add in some of the terrain so it all blends in a little bit better. I've used some Deluxe Materials speed epoxy to glue this to the terrain as we're gluing to foam and wood and plastic. The speed epoxy is safe with all those materials, and it only dries in 20 minutes, so should be able to get started on adding a little bit of sculpt mould. Alright, so I've mixed up some sculpt mould. You've seen me use this a few times. Just basically a very good sort of filling material, good for doing ground cover, things like that, and it'll do a lovely job of filling this gap in. So be very careful, of course, to protect the walls and the scenery. It's quite a forgiving material to use, and if you do get a bit somewhere it shouldn't be, it does just wash off while it's wet. So let's go ahead and very gently put that all into position, leave it to dry, and we can come back and finish off painting and adding bits of ballast and various bits of scenery. Okay, so the sculpt mould is now installed. That's looking a lot better already, so I'll leave that to dry. We'll come back and paint that at a later date. So while we'll wait for that to dry, I'm going to move back over to this section and complete a little job that I've been meaning to do for months. So about a year ago in this section I built the surrounding scenery, and I just put a random bit of plastic tube in that bit where I've dug out the terrain, and it was just to remind me to install a proper drainage pipe into this section, and I finally got around to doing it. So I've had some of these scale model scenery drainage pipes sitting in the box of spares for quite some time, and I've just assembled that one. It's a brick paper kit. I'm not a massive fan of brick paper, but in fairness that does actually look pretty good. That should do the job. And I've just sort of dug the terrain out. We should be able to install it something like that. I'll get a bit of sculpt mould in there, blend it in. We'll come back with a bit of paint and foliage, they'll look like it's always been there. It's certainly looking a bit better than the previous effort, so we'll leave it there, and I'll come back once it's dried, give it a lick of paint and replace some of the missing foliage and grass. The sculpt mould has had a couple of days to dry, and I've just gone over that, as you can see, with a little bit of brown paint very carefully with a small brush, just to bed things in. So I'll add a little bit of ground cover, and then we can come along and add a small amount of water into the basin and actually look like these drainage pipes have been doing some work. That was something I always planned on doing, but I never quite got round to sorting out the outlet pipes. So with those done, I can actually add a little bit of water into the scene. It should look quite nice. The sculpt mould along this section has also dried, so the same story. Carefully painted it with some brown paint. I'll come along with some ballast and some ground cover, finish this off. Perhaps a couple of relay boxes wouldn't go amiss, and I'll reinstate the lids for the cable troughing. Okay, so it's been a couple of days since I placed the ballast and earth down. I soaked it all up in 50-50 mix of PVA glue and water, and that's now dried. It's rock hard. So we can now carry on adding details, and we'll do a little bit of weathering as well to the ballast here, blend it in. So I'm just going to finish off this small area here. You can see I've left that bare. This is next to the signal gantry, and I thought it'd be nice just to add a little bit of infrastructure detail. So we'll get some relay boxes, a couple of cables and things just sort of sitting there, and I think in proportion to the flats which are sitting in the background should just add a little bit of detail, look a little bit more interesting than just if the whole thing was just, you know, grass and ballast. So there's one of the relay boxes. That's the smaller type. It's made by Will's Kits. You get, I think, 4 in a pack, something like that. I've got a few of those left over, so we'll put those over into that section. bit of glue, bit of ballast, so we've all just dumped it all in one area. Not the most ideal method, but it's got the job done. Once that's dried, I'll remove the excess material, obviously, that's sitting on tops of the boxes and the wall and the cable troughing lids. But we'll just leave that to soak and dry. We'll go and do some other jobs somewhere else. Okay, well, moving back over to this section, the scatter is now dried. So I think a little bit of static grass and perhaps a few small shrubs and bushes, nothing too crazy. And we'll just blend that in a little bit better. And then I think I've got some water left, some of the Woodland Scenics deep pour murky water, and we can put some of that into the basin there, and it'll look quite a bit better, I think, looking out across the area. Might even get a reflection of a train in the surface, but we'll see. So first I'll add a little bit of static grass. Today I'm using some stuff from Model Scene. I've got quite a lot of it in stock. It seems to be pretty good, not had any problems with it. Most of the grass on this area is all made using the Model Scene grass. So I'll add a few clumps around those drainage pipes. So it's been a couple of hours and this is now sufficiently dried, so I've removed the excess material, and next thing to do is just come along and add in the cable troughing lids, and also need to sort out something for the cable troughing to get past the signal gantry. It was just a little bit of a mistake on my part when I actually built this and fitted it all into place. It ended up being smack bang where the cable troughing wanted to run, but no matter, we'll fix that. Once I've glued all of the lids back on the troughing, we'll do a bit of weathering with the airbrush, nothing too crazy, just want to blend it into what I've already done previously, and then I'll add a bit of static grass and some stuff like that. Do it in that order so I don't end up painting the static grass. Okay, well I finished reinstating the lids for the cable troughing, and you can see I've also just made a small piece there to go around the signal gantry, just cut a few scraps together. So now I've got to wait for that to dry. It's one of the worst bits of the hobby, is you spend half your life waiting for things to dry. Once that has dried, I'll do some weathering, just a little bit of airbrushing along here, and then we'll add some bushes and a few bits of static grass, things like that, and just touch up anywhere where there's a little bit of white plaster showing on the wall. So I've just mixed up some rail match sleeper grime and popped that in the airbrush, and now we're just going to do a very light bit of weathering to the new section at the back. I have put a little bit of masking tape over the tracks just here, and that's just to avoid making the weathering on the section I've already done more intense. It's going to look a little bit strange, so I'm going to try and keep the paint away from the bits I've already done, but we do need to blend this in a little bit and tone it down. So there we go. I don't know how well you can see, but the level of weathering here is now very similar to what we have here. It doesn't look out of place, and the lids of all the cable troughing have just been toned down slightly and look like they've been there for a few years. So now it's time for some static grass. I'm just going to be doing a few spots along the back edge here, mostly up against the brick wall where it'll be sheltered a little bit from the elements and the passing trains, so you might get a few weeds and things growing. So we'll do a few bits of grass and then we'll come back and perhaps add a few more bits. But I don't want to go too crazy, I don't want to do too much. I'm quite pleased with how it looks already. So we'll just add a few bits and see how it goes. I'll be using rocket card glue. I've been using that quite a lot so far in this video. It just dries a fair bit faster than regular PVA or white glue. So there we have some small tufts of grass. I've already vacuumed off the excess material. When the glue is wet, you can be a bit cheeky and vacuum off the excess. Just be careful, don't get the vacuum cleaner too close. But that saved a bit of time. So I'll let that dry, and while it's drying, I can add a few more bits and pieces. I think a few clumps of foliage. So here's just a random assortment of foliage. This is left over from when I make trees. Just the excess stuff that falls on the ground. I've got quite a lot of it saved up, and it's just a load of random scatters and different materials, but it works well just as a little bit of ground cover. So I'll add a little bit of that in a few places. Okay, to glue it down, nothing special. A little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to soak the area down. And then just some very diluted white glue. Now, of course, this wouldn't be a Everard junction if we didn't add some litter. So, very difficult to see that, but that is a newspaper. And what I like to do is just soak that in some of the diluted PVA glue. And then once that soaks in, the paper is much more easy to manipulate. I mean, it's still difficult, but it's a lot easier. And you can make it sit over a bend or a curve and actually be a little bit scrunched up. Let's do another one just there. These are made by Scale Model Scenery. It's just printed out on a sheet. You just cut them out. Obviously very delicate and very fiddly, but if you can get them into position, it looks very effective. So I'll continue to add litter. We'll do that in a few places along this scene, let it all dry, and it certainly look a little bit more real world than just being you know, green and pleasant. Okay, well there we go. Some newspapers from the past and some newspapers from the future. But the likelihood of you actually getting down and reading every single one is pretty low, so I just cut out whatever ones are next on the sheet and put them into position. So back over here, the scenery has completed drying, and I've just mixed up some Woodland Scenics Deep Pour Murky. You have to work quite quickly with this stuff when mixing it and preparing it, so I did that off camera. Woodland Scenics have a very good set of instructions that come with it. So let's go ahead and put some nice murky stagnant water into this section of the scenery. I've been wanting to do this for absolutely ages. Okay, so I've just let it flow out for a little bit, and then just using an old paintbrush, just blending in the edges a little bit. Something a little bit like that. But I'm quite pleased with that. That looks so much better already. I've also added some to the ditch on the other side of the drainage area. And again, that just makes this bit look much more interesting. Also done a few bits along this section, just to look as though some of the rainwater is washing down from further up. So while I wait for the water to dry, it's basically an epoxy resin, and poured in that sort of quantity it's going to take at least 24 hours to cure. So while that happens, I'm going to move on to some other small jobs. So the next thing to do is to further the brickwork into the tunnels, the bridges. So that will look considerably better, obviously, with that fully in position as opposed to that nasty white hardboard we've got there at the moment. This is the same style of brick as the retaining walls, so it should all match quite nicely. Will's kits sell a separate pack of, they call them builder's sheets, and it's literally just small pieces of the same stuff. That's the sort of thing I'm aiming for, so what I'll do is I'll get it glued into position and try and make that join as minimal as possible, and then we'll go ahead and just add a few more weathering effects and just blend the two pieces together. But that certainly looks a lot better than just the hardboard or timber or whatever you've got showing. Obviously once you put the bridge back into position. Something a little bit like that. Looks a lot better. Mixed up some more speed epoxy. Dries in 20 minutes, so we'll use this to glue the wall into position. Stuff like super glue, it's going to go off too quickly. It's not going to give me enough time to get a piece this large installed, so we'll use the speed epoxy. The epoxy on this side is now dried. I've done my best with the joint, tried to make it as invisible as possible. I'll add a little bit of weathering and a few effects. I'll probably get some graffiti in there at some point as well, but not too bad. Quite happy with that. Now here we have the other side. Again, I need to carry on working on blending the joint a little bit better, but it's nice to actually see the brickwork running all the way through like it should. And we have the same story on this side as well, on the street scene. So I've left all of this overnight to fully dry. I'm quite pleased with that. It certainly looks an awful lot more improved than just having a baseboard edge. So I might add some more litter and a few bits and pieces. A bit of graffiti wouldn't go amiss in future. But generally speaking, that's quite an improvement to this section. So we'll leave that there for this video, but we'll certainly come back and continue to add more bits and pieces. So with those pieces of wall now installed, it's looking a lot better. So I can carry on with the details around here now. We can put the bridge sides properly into position. And I've also got a load of detailing to do, obviously behind the walling. Can think about finishing up the pathways, filling up the canal with some murky water, finish the pavements in here. Plenty to do, but that's just a nice little touch. Very easy to just leave details like that, you know, where you've got a tunnel or somewhere where, you know, things disappear from view. It's easy to just, you know, leave it alone, but the addition of some brick there has really helped things out. The deep pour murky water is now dried, and I'm very pleased with how that's looking. Certainly a lot better than it was before. So this video is getting a bit long now, so I think we'll leave that there. I'll come back in the future and add more and more details to little areas and bits and pieces. There's so many small jobs left on the to-do list. I mean, for example, I've got a spot just here where we need to put some relay boxes and make the track detail look a bit more interesting. So there's a great deal left to do all over the place, and I'll come back and do some more of these style of videos where we do lots of little jobs.